Okay, so this is going to be our first video in a series looking at the research methods in a series of ethnographic monographs. There's going to be 11 of them. Some of them are based in Thailand. We have 1, 2, 3 based in Thailand. One is in England looking at Thai mural art. Mural art in Thai Buddhist temples in England. There's a few that relate to Islam in Pakistan, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. And this will give us a good look at a range of methods used by anthropologists. And these are methodological discussions in ethnographic monographs. So we're going to be looking at things inductively. We're going to be looking at how anthropologists describe their fieldwork experience, the ethical problems that they had, problems of access, about the relative importance they put on participant observation or non-participant observation, the types of interviews, visual methods, all sorts of stuff. So this is going to be an inductive take on ethnographic research, and the first book that we're going to do is my book. And so in every book we look at, we are going to, I think almost every book, we're going to be maybe peeking at the contents. When you read a book, make sure that you read the abstract, the contents, the index, to have a bit of an idea about where the most interesting things are. The first chapter that you read is the introduction, probably the last is the conclusion. And if you are interested in doing field work, if you are interested in knowing about how authors went about collecting data, what research methods they use to collect data, that information is usually contained in either the prologue or the introduction. And so this is my fieldwork discussion, and all of these books are available on the Google Drive. You will see a link to the book on the Google Drive. You will also notice that I have tagged the books on the Google Drive with the tag monograph to make it easier for you to find. So for example, in my book I mentioned that I had been living in Jabetiko, in a Malay community in Patani town, for 4 years before I began to actually do field work. I mentioned that people had become close friends, and my desire for people to remain friends after I concluded my fieldwork, because I planned to stay there, affected about the types of questions that I asked. I refer to a research spiral. Spirals are different from circles because they have a direction and they can change direction. We've used the word ethnographic saturation in previous lectures, where we do interviews, more and more interviews, and we find that there is no more data being produced, and I make some comparisons between that and what I refer to the research spiral. When you have reached ethnographic saturation, the spiral, which has a direction, turns into a circle. So I mentioned that I initially intended to conduct one-on-one interviews. However, whenever I interviewed women in a home, I was occupied by my wife, so that there would be another woman around, and that was appropriate in that context. I conducted interviews with married couples, which was a lot easier for me it was very common, I mentioned, it was very common for me to begin to start to do one-on-one interviews, and then before long a whole pile of people would join, and it turned into a kind of informal function group, which was not always my intention. So I did a large number of semi-structured interviews, but these were followed by, I described, some in-depth interviews with key informants. Now, the concept of key informant is one that I've already mentioned. They are people who are able to, they are particularly knowledgeable or influential, or people that you have a close relationship with and who are able to give in-depth answers to sometimes tricky questions. I mentioned in my methodological discussion, I mentioned the importance of interviewing in both Thai and Malay, and I provide the reasons for this, and for for non-native speakers of both Thai and Malay or any other language, it's often important to mention whether and how often a translator was used, and I explain how I dealt with my problems if I needed external help to transcribe interviews. I mentioned complications in my fieldwork, and this will be something which we will notice in more than one ethnographic monograph that I conducted fieldwork in after the events of September 11, 2001, I'm sorry. And I've actually got a spelling mistake there. The September 11 was not in 2011, it was in 2001. So for me that meant that there were a number of anti-Western sentiments that complicated for a while my access to people. After that, there was a dramatic reduction in increase in violence that complicated my movements and sometimes led to, again, suspicion about outsiders. The vast majority of residents in Jabotico cooperated with my fieldwork, but some who had not been personally acquainted with me were not. But that is just normal for any and all researchers involved in conducting research, perhaps when there are religious differences at a time of political insecurity. So let's just pop on down. I take a bit of time to explain how I understood my identity as a researcher. And I quote Agar, who refers to anthropologists being professional strangers, adept at negotiating, multifaceted and dynamic betwixt and between identities. This was a train of thought that I found very helpful and resembled my own personal experience. I then refer to a number of ways that religious outsiders have represented themselves to the people they are studying. For example, there are some famous examples of Westerners who have written accounts of Islam who either converted to Islam or who posed as a Muslim in order to get access, and that there are a number of other anthropologists who have made different decisions about their own religious identity. And I mentioned that I interact with some of the critiques, some of the discussions in the ethnographic literature. Rita Gross been one of them. I cite the interesting example of a man called Ron Lukinsbull, who was encouraged to present himself as a Muslim before beginning his field work. And I talk about my own religious background and how I felt that it was much better for me to present myself as a Christ follower rather than someone who was an unbeliever or agnostic or atheist or was pretending to be a Muslim. And you may have seen the lecture where people in South Thailand comment that this was something that in the long term has been of great benefits with me. While my non-Muslim identity complicated my rapport with some informants, I had the advantages of being able to speak both Thai and Malay. And I comment here on a number of similarities between language and religion. Those who are familiar with more than one religious tradition and who have learnt more than one language are able to understand how, and we'll go out of full screen now. These people are able to understand the importance of hardwired patterns of understanding. So I've mentioned a number of things in my own methodological discussion about how I came to live in this part of Thailand, about my participant observation, about language, the role of local languages that I spoke, the types of research I did, the problems that I had, that I faced and resolved with my own religious identity. And I hope that has been an interesting example of how just one monograph has described the process of ethnographic fieldwork. Go back and read that all yourself. These lectures are intended to increase your interest so that you can go and read yourself. Okay, thanks very much.